What's up guys, Belamy here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the upcoming balance patch coming out of Korea that's going to shift the meta in ArcheAge quite dramatically, I feel. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. For those of you who are wondering where I've been, I did play on the Southeast Asian server for a couple days. I think it was like 3 or 4 days in total. I did log in a little bit here and there in the following week after that, but for the most part the content was kind of blocked over there. I believe it still is. So I got bored over there pretty quick without anything too dramatic to grind, so I found myself quitting ArcheAge to play the Path of Exile League, which I do most leagues anyway, as well as playing a little bit of Valorant when that came out. So I've been off the ArcheAge train for the last couple months, but I'm going to be getting back into it, working on my mage on ArcheAge Unchained. Yes, I would rather play on ArcheAge Unchained with 200 ping with all of my friends than I would play on Southeast Asia with the 100 ping or so that I had there. The ping was great. I got a taste of the sweet elixir that is better ping in ArcheAge. But unfortunately, I like my character on ArcheAge Unchained too much, and I'm not just yet ready to give it up to start over again for the 4th, 5th time. So we're going to be playing over on Unchained, and we're going to be talking about the balance patch that's coming out soon. For those of you who aren't aware, the balance patch that we're referring to, there are obviously some skill changes. We're not going to be talking about them at all today. We're going to be talking mostly about the base stat changes that will be happening and how that's going to affect classes and the meta as a whole. And then a little bit specifically towards my cast time mage towards the end of the video. So if you want to stick around and learn a bit about how mages are going to be changing and how I think my build of mage is going to slot nicely into the meta when that comes around, then stick around for then. But basically, this is just going to be me talking about the balance patch and how the meta is going to shift. So this table, if you haven't seen this before, this is a patch that hopefully we'll be getting pretty soon in ArcheAge Unchained or in the West as a whole. It came out in Korea not too long after the third garden patch, and hopefully for us, we'll get it pretty soon as well. If I had to put a time on it, it could be anywhere between the next 2 to 4 months, I'd say. Hopefully closer to the 2-month mark. It could be even before that. We really don't hear anything from Gamigo. They don't communicate with us, so it's hard to tell. It's just a guess at this point. But essentially, what they've changed in Korea is that your base stats, so your strength, agility, intelligence, and spirit, this is not affecting stamina in any way, are going to essentially be getting diminishing returns, so you can't stack them extremely high and get the full amount of value out of them. So as an example, we'll take strength. You get your crit rate. Currently, right now, if you have 1,000 strength, you're going to get 27.4 crit rate, and 2,000, you're going to get exactly double that. Every single point gives the same amount of value. After the patch, however, you're going to be getting 33% at 1,000, so more at lower values. And then up to 2,000, you're only going to have 39.5. So at somewhere along the line, presumably around 1,000, it's going to hit a pretty, I want to say hard soft cap, but it's a soft cap. It's going to hit a soft cap, a pretty brutal soft cap as well. And you're going to get a lot less value out of your main stat. This is across the board for all types of crit rates, so it's for agility, intelligence, and spirit as well. In terms of your attacks, they're actually getting slightly buffed. You're going to have more at lower values and even more at higher values. However, that's not very significant. Most classes don't care too much about their base attack stat. It is nice to have, and it's not something to complain about, but it's not something that you go out of your way to stack. It is better for archers, so I can see why archers may want to have a bit more of their base stat than other classes will. Even after the patch, but further on, melees are going to have less parry rate overall, essentially, at higher numbers. Agility is going to be less for, evasion is going to be less for agility users. Intelligence is losing its evasion completely, which I think is honestly really, really good. Even as a mage myself who really likes evasion, it's kind of broken, I'm not gonna lie. Mages having like 50% evasion is kind of stupid, in my opinion. It's just very unbalanced. As a person who's played melee in the past, and a lot of it, I've always really been a melee main. more so than a mage, even though most of you probably know me for my mage gameplay. I think this is a good change. As someone who has played both sides of the coin, I think intelligence losing evasion is annoying for me as a mage right now, and a lot of people will really be unhappy with this, but I think it's a good change. And also Spirit is going to be losing their parry rate also. And on top of that, furthermore, Strength and Agility are both going to be getting a flat amount of focus from their main stat, which again works against that Agility and parry rate and things like that. So parries and evasions and things like that are going to be less prevalent. They're still going to be good, and there's going to be no reason to not have like evasion gems or parry gems or whatever it is you have in your build. It's just you're not going to have like 50-60% fucking evasion as an archer or a mage at endgame. So really good change in my opinion. It was necessary, honestly, because it was if anyone watching this who's played Melee or is playing Melee, you know what I'm talking about. So this is a good change for you guys. And then, of course, the big thing is that Intelligence and Spirit is going to be getting a base amount of cast time for their base stat, which is really, really good for players like me who are playing cast time mages. Obviously, healers are going to have a good time with that as well. There's nothing bad about a little bit of extra cast time as a healer, obviously. So I suspect a lot more people will be kind of following in my footsteps in the way of going with a cast time mage build. It's not insanely broken at the moment, but I feel like after that patch it will definitely be a lot more viable, and it'll bring it kind of way more in line with the meta and be a lot more playable, and I think we'll see a lot more people running it. We'll talk about that a bit more in depth later, and then we also have the mana points changing on Intelligence, which isn't, who really cares about mana points? Do I need to touch on that? Not really. But, so we have some changes here, but the real significant thing is the fact that essentially, across the board, stacking your main stat is going to be something of the past. You can do it, but it would be kind of stupid for you to do it. I predict that most players who are smart will probably end up with between 1,100 to 1,300 of their main stat there, give or take. I don't think it would be very smart going too much above that. I think like 1,100, 1,200 is going to be the sweet spot there somewhere. And then your other stats will all be into stamina. So that obviously means that players across the board are going to be much tankier, because stamina is going to give you a ton of HP, and it's also going to give you magic and physical defense. So people in general will be tankier in terms of their defenses as well as their HP pool. So yeah, it's going to definitely change the meta quite dramatically. I think people in general will have 10 to 15k more HP on their builds, which is going to be very, very interesting for PvP. Just because, everything's going to be slightly less bursty. You're going to see a lot less one-shots from especially things like melees and archers. I think it'd still be possible to one-shot people pretty easily with things like arc lightning if you're built for it. Come on, ExitLag, step off. Stop trying to get free ads in my video. But yeah, essentially, most players are going to be getting about 1,000, 1,200 or there of their base stat, and then going full stamina. So everyone's going to be much, much tankier. Excuse me. Yes, you're going to get more base attack stat, but that is nowhere near good enough to merit stacking your base stat anywhere close to 2,000. You can see right now I'm just shy of 1,900. I think a lot of most endgame build players have 2,000 easily. I've actually already got some stamina rolls on a lot of my stuff, so like my necklace is stamina, and I got some stamina rolls. So my HP is not the greatest, but I don't have all full intelligence because I was not anticipating, but I know this patch is coming down the pipe, so I didn't want to go out of my way to roll all of my stamina into my int, which is something I would have done in the past. So, but first big thing that's going to be affecting the meta is the fact that players on average are going to be much more tanky. They're going to have more HP and slightly more defenses across the board. I think that's a pretty safe assumption to make. Anyone who's not going to be trading out some main stat for stamina is going to be pretty dumb in the brain, if you know what I'm saying. The other thing that's going to be affected is obviously our critical rates. No matter what kind of build you play, whether you're a defense penetration or a crit damage based build, you want critical rate no matter what. And the fact that you're going to have less overall means that it's going to be less viable to do hybrid type builds, which in most cases is a critical damage build, because you'd like to roll crit damage gems in your weapons, and then you would like to have crit damage rolls and a magic defense penetration roll or a phys pen roll if you're a melee or an archer. So essentially, you're not going to have enough crit rate to allow you to play this kind of build. If you were to play some kind of hybrid build, you're going to end up with like 60% crit rate after the patch, which is just abysmal. But as a rule of thumb, I tell people no lower than 85% crit rate, otherwise your damage starts to feel super inconsistent no matter what build you're playing. So you want to have over 85%. That means that you either have to play a full crit damage build with crit damage and crit rate rolls everywhere, and not have almost no magic defense penetration to help with your damage, or you're going to play a defense penetration build or a magic defense penetration build, which we already see a lot of. In terms of melees and archers, defense penetration builds are already really good simply because of the passives they have that give them just a flat amount of physical defense penetration. Melees have puncture, which gives them 3k, and if they're a swift blade on top of that, they can get anywhere between another 500 to another 3k on top of that, which gives them an insane amount of defense penetration. Archers have Deadeye, which gives them 3k if they're standing still. When I don't know when the patch comes that upgrades that or buffs Deadeye, but essentially when that patch happens as well, they're going to get 3k defense penetration while moving. So every archer is going to be using that, meaning every archer is going to have 3k defense penetration. And essentially the way I kind of sum that up is physical defense penetration builds are a lot better, in my opinion, than magic physical defense penetration builds, simply because they have access to a free amount of defense penetration, whereas mages don't have that option. Now, that's unfortunate, to say the least, because the way defense penetration works is the more you have, the better it is. That sounds kind of obvious, super obvious, but essentially it scales exponentially because of how defense works. Defense works, it has diminishing returns. Essentially, at lower amounts, you get way more value, and at later amounts, you're going to get less value out of each point of physical or magic defense. So, you know, your defense penetration build works the opposite way, essentially meaning the closer you get someone to 0, the more value you're going to get out of your defense penetration. If you have X amount of defense penetration and you're leaving someone at 4 or 5k physical defense or magic defense, if you're a mage, they have a good chunk of their mitigation still intact, whereas if you get them to 0, they're going to be really, really struggling and you're going to do a ton of damage. So magic defense penetration can be hit and miss. If you're hitting someone in leather, 9 times out of 10, you're going to do a ton of damage to them, because leather has a mixture of magic and physical defense, meaning that it's easier, no matter what side of the coin you're on, to get them to 0. However, if you're hitting someone, like if you're a mage, for example, the maximum amount of magic defense penetration you can really get, and this is being super generous, is like 11,000. And, you know, most players, even leather players at endgame, when you get that amount, are going to have way more than that anyway. So you're still going to be, like, for example, a leather player is probably going to have anywhere between 13 to 14k, probably can be potentially 15k if they have any kind of magical physical defense gems, and then when they have more stamina after the balance patch that we're talking about, they're going to have even more of those stats as well. So, you know, best case scenario, you're hitting someone with 4k defense, whatever version you're looking at, which is going to leave them with 33%, give or take, of their mitigation, which is, you know, half of what their mitigation is at certain levels. So ideally, with defense penetration, you want to get as close to 0 as possible. It's very difficult to do that against most players as a mage unless they're in plate. And most people who are in plate have big, thick magic shields and a ton of magic defense gems anyway. So those people also have either comparable or more magic defense than leather players. So generally, not that they're weak, but I think defense penetration builds as a whole are just better on phys defense side of things than magic defense. If there's anything that happens in the future that gives us a bit of free magic defense pen, that would be really good. It would work wonders for the build, but I still think that despite that late game, like super late game, when people have too much resilience, magic defense pen builds are going to be slightly better. I've seen a chart somewhere of how these work for a dual wield mage. If I can find that, I'll put it up on the screen for you guys to give you guys an idea of how the kind of damage scales from early into late game. It'll be a good reference for a lot of you to look at. So hopefully that's up on screen right now. But if I don't have that, essentially, what I'm trying to say is defense penetration builds and magic defense penetration builds are most likely going to be way more prevalent in the upcoming patches when this comes out. And the simple reason for that is the fact that when you're building a defense penetration build, you obviously put defense penetration gems in all of your stuff, and your rolls on your weapons are always going to be your defense penetration, whatever version it is, Fizz or Magic, and then your version of critical rate, because you don't need any of the other stats. Yes, you can make an argument for putting a little bit of attack speed if you're a melee or an archer in that roll, not really worth it, or a cast time roll there if you're a mage, maybe. But for the most part, you want to really have, say, for me, for example, if I was going to do a magic defense pen build, I would go magic defense penetration and then magic critical rate as my rolls. That means that overall I'm going to have more critical rate to play with, meaning that when this patch hits, I'm not going to be hit as hard. Whereas someone like me, who's built hybrid right now, doesn't have crit rate rolls, except for the staff that I just changed to. I had magic defense penetration and magic critical damage on all my rolls, so my crit rate would be basically dog shit after the patch unless I change a few things, right? So I think leading up to the patch, and when the patch comes out, we're going to start seeing a lot more players switch over to defense penetration, especially melees and archers. I think in terms of archers, you can still kind of stick with critical damage simply because you get a little bit of flat penetration out of your kit. And on top of that, archers can stack their critical damage much higher in the end game than other classes can. So despite resilience being super high late game, you can still get a decent amount of damage out of your crit damage because you can get it close to 350%, which is pretty dope. So the first thing is players are obviously going to have way more HP with the stamina and more defenses. Second thing is defense penetration is most likely going to end up being a lot more prevalent because of the critical nerfs, and just, you know, having access to critical damage, or sorry, critical rate rolls as a defense pen build is, you know, is super nice, and it makes building a lot easier, and your damage is going to be way more consistent after the balance patch. That's the first two main things that I want to talk about in terms of meta changing. The third thing is the fact that cast time is going to be available for mages. Now, I'm a cast time mage. I'm definitely part of the 1% in terms of the meta right now. However, after the balance patch, I presume that we will see a decent number of cast time mages. I don't think you'll see more cast time mages than attack speed mages when that happens, but I definitely think you'll see more than just Belamy Prime once in a lifetime in a gladiator arena or wherever you might run into me in a Halsey raid. So that's exciting for me. I'll talk about that briefly. Essentially, the goal for me is to get my cast time before the balance patch as close to 55% as possible. If you don't know, the cap for your cast time reduction is 40%, which means you can get 60% reduction, getting it down to 40% of the base of your cast time. So right now I'm at 62.8. If I get that down to about 55%, if we look at the chart over here, I'm going to get between 13.7 and 15%, depending on how much intelligence I'm left with after the patch. More cast time, which will put me close to the cap. And on top of that, I will have a little bit of spirit when I change my stat migration over to the stamina one. I will have 158 or slightly more. I'll have about 200 spirit when that happens, which will also give me 1 or 2% cast time as well. So I should comfortably hit the cast time cap once the balance patch hits if I have about 55%, which is what I'm aiming for at this point. So 55% cast time, I should hit the cap pretty easily. And I think that's going to make my build pretty broken in terms of one-shotting players with Arc Lightning. Right now, the easiest way to explain it is the fact, okay, Arc Lightning has for me, a 2.2 second cast time. The base is 3.5. If I cast Mana Fountain, or cast Magic Circle to get Mana Fountain, I get another 15% reduction on that, and I get down to 1.8 seconds. After the balance patch, with the buffed Mana Fountain, as well as my buffed cast time, I'll be able to cast Arc Lightning at, it'll either be 1 second cast, or it'll be 0.9 second cast, which is really fucking fast. And that means that essentially I can squeeze more debuffs onto a player between my Flame Bolt and my Lightning, my Arc Lightning. So we can see that Arc Lightning does 30% more damage to people who are on fire. Our Flame Bolt puts them on fire for 4.2 seconds. Essentially, 1 second will be that will be to cast the Arc Lightning, and every other second in between that is to debuff the target after my Flame Bolt as much as possible. So currently, right now, with Mana Fountain up, I'm able to Flame Bolt and then maybe throw out a Critical Discord, and then if I'm lucky, a Chanty. Usually, to be consistent, I will Flame Bolt and then Discord and hope that someone in the group is playing Chanty for me, and then I Arc Lightning. However, when the patch hits, my cast time will be so good as such that I will be able to Critical Discord, maybe throw out a Startling Strain to charm my target if it's large scale. If not, I'll be able to Dissonance to remove their shield. If they're Plate with a Magic Shield, or anyone with a Magic Shield for that matter. And I'll just be able to essentially squeeze more debuffs onto my target between my Flame Bolt and my Arc Lightning, making it much more powerful in terms of a one-shot ability. And in saying that, I think Arc Lightning is probably going to be the only skill able to pull off a one-shot after the balance patch, simply because people are going to have so much more HP. Stealth Shadow Smite's being nerfed, so, you know, the one-shot potential of that is pretty much already gone at this point anyway, and it'll even be more so gone at that point. I don't think many archers are going to be one-shotting players with Conk unless they're, you know, hitting a Clothy with a staff like myself. But yeah, Arc Lightning is going to be probably the only consistent one-shot ability in the game after that patch, and it's going to be even better than it is now. Not to mention that Arc Lightning's being buffed. They're removing the critical damage from it, I believe, but they're adding skill damage to it, which scales it even more nuts. So yeah, yeah, Arc Lightning's going to be insane. It already is insane. I already pretty consistently one-shot most players if I am able to actually set up on them in a group scenario. The only trouble with cast time for me right now is in group PvP. Most players die before I get my Arc Lightning off. Like if I Fireball, Dissonance, Arc Lightning, most of them are dead by the time the Arc Lightning goes off because it's a 1.8 second cast, and I am debuffing them in the middle of that. So if other people are hitting them, I'm basically debuffing them for them, and they die either right as my Arc Lightning goes off or slightly before. So right now in things like Halsey, the cast time mage does feel a little bit clunky, I will say. But when my cast time is at 40%, I'll be able to drop meteors on people's heads in a second and Arc Lightning people off the face of the earth pretty quickly as well. So I'm pretty excited for that. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any thoughts about how you think this balance patch is going to affect the state of ArcheAge and ArcheAge Unchained and the meta itself, I'd love to hear about it in the comments, or join my Discord and let's have a chat about it over there. Feel free to DM me and ask me anything if you like. I'm pretty happy to talk to most people. I try to reply to everyone. And yeah, that's the video. So stamina, everyone's getting way more HP and less crit rate, which means more people are probably going to be doing defense penetration builds, because crit damage unless you're an archer is probably going to fall off pretty hard when that happens, because you cannot access defense penetration easily. And yeah, cast time mage is probably going to be a bit more brought up in line with the meta, hopefully. So pretty excited for this balance patch to come out. Hopefully it comes out in the next couple months and not too much longer. Like I said, we don't really hear much from Gamigo. They don't really communicate with us, so it's hard to tell. But like I said, if I had to guess, hopefully within the next 2 months. So you guys have a nice night, day, whatever it is where you are. Enjoy the game as best you can, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Good night.